Who's taking this? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this year's St. Marylebone Festival. It's very good to be able to be back in person this year after a little hiatus last year. I can't think why that was, but there must have been a reason why we weren't able to meet. But it's really good to have you here in the church with us this afternoon, and I hope that you will have a very happy time. We're almost reaching the final hurdles of this particular festival, 2 concerts tomorrow and 1 more this evening. And it really has been a splendid week with some extraordinary soundscapes of story and song. But today we bring the 6th Baron Byron of Rochdale to our festival. I wonder if he'd been known as Lord Rochdale. He would have had quite such an appeal during his years. And grateful thanks to the Byron Society for being a sponsor of this festival. Born in John Lewis, Byron was baptized in this parish church in 1788. He really was born in John Lewis, although John Lewis, of course, was not there when he was born, just as the first St. Marylebone Parish Church is in the basement of Debenhams. Indeed, both of those are no longer there. And Byron's baptism took place not in this building, but in its predecessor, which was just behind us on the high street. Each of his lovers, even his lovers, called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know. And I must issue a health warning to those of a particularly sensitive and nervous disposition that extracts from Byron's writings will be read this afternoon, and they do contain adult material. I think that's how one phrases these things these days. And this afternoon, we will welcome Dr. Emily Patterson-Morgan, who is the director of the Byron Society. Now, she joins us from Dubai, which is why we've had a slight delay in actually starting this, not exactly at 1 o'clock. So please forgive us for that, but I think all is now ready to run. We also welcome back to this stage Gavin Roberts, our Director of Music here at St. Marylebone, who is also the director of this festival, and our sopranos Amanda Pitt and Helen Semple. I very much hope that within just a few moments we can re-establish that link with Dubai. Otherwise, I think I'm going to have to come and just read you poetry for the next half an hour. There'll be a bit of song as well.
First of all,
I'll let her start again.
First of all, many thanks to Gavin Roberts and the festival for their kind invitation to give this talk, which is based on a chapter I've contributed to a forthcoming book titled Traveller's Eyes, which deals with British travellers' accounts of Europe. Now, Lord Byron was one of the more well-travelled members of his generation. Born in London in 1788 and reared by his impoverished mother in Aberdeen until he unexpectedly inherited a dilapidated estate in Nottinghamshire in 1798, he celebrated adulthood by embarking on his own version of the Grand Tour. However, instead of a series of Western European cities and society balls, the young man opted to travel eastwards, visiting Turkey, Albania, and Greece. Transforming his experiences into a wildly popular poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, in 1812, Byron became the literary lion of London. Other immensely popular poems soon followed, and the handsome young poet garnered acclaim in Britain, Europe, and America. However, the combination of his melancholic temperament, susceptibility to female charms, and an ill-advised marriage resulted in national scandal when his wife left him amidst ugly rumors of sexual perversion. In April of 1816, a defiant Byron left England, never to return. After travelling through Belgium, Germany, and Switzerland, Byron arrived in Italy in the autumn of 1816, and after a month of exploring, eventually settled in Venice. From here, he wrote hundreds of letters to friends, family, and business associates. Few readers would ever say of Byron's correspondence what William Wordsworth sheepishly admits of his own. This is a wretchedly dull letter. This is especially true of the lively letters written between 1816 and 1820, during Byron's time in Italy. Covering everything from politics to prostitutes, his animated accounts make for riotous reading. Even those to his lawyer on the driest of business matters are frequently laced with humorous anecdotes and witty allusions. Meanwhile, those to his friends exactly conform to 19th century English essayist Charles Lamb's definition of the perfect letter: crammed and very funny. This is particularly true of the letters written from Venice, a city Byron pungently describes as a sea Sodom. For Venice's main attraction for Byron was not the crumbling architecture, luminous light, and ethereal mists, but rather the potential for what he called promiscuous concubinage. And his frank and witty letters are written from the vantage of a foreigner who loves Italian women, or rather, in Byron's case, many Italian women, all of whom were, according to him, about 5 feet 10 inches high, with great black eyes and fine figures, fit to breed gladiators from. And we're now going to listen to a piece by Rossini that really evokes the beauties of Italy. Your angles, Byron writes to his publisher John Murray in 1818, in general know little of the Italians, whereas I humbly conjecture that I know as much of Italian society and language as any. After all, I am in the case to know more of them than most Englishmen, having lived among the natives as both an amica de casa and the amica de cure of the Dama. Shortly after his arrival in Venice in winter of 1816, Byron writes to his friend and fellow poet Thomas More with the happy news that most of the women in Venice are dissolute. In a letter to James Wedderburn Webster, an old school friend and notorious womanizer, Byron paints an alluring picture of female promiscuity. Young and old, pretty and ugly, high and low, all are employed in the laudable practice of love-making, he writes. And though most beauty is found amongst the middling and lower classes, this, of course, only renders their amatory habits more generally diffused. Byron was not one to miss a sexual opportunity. One travelling companion recalls how, on arriving at a Belgian inn, the dashingly handsome poet fell like a thunderbolt upon the chambermaid, and he was swift to take advantage of Venetian women's amatory habits. Characterized by the same lightly ironic touch and burlesque register we find in his satirical epic Don Juan, Byron's spirited Italian correspondence describes these erotic pursuits in riotous detail. Repeatedly boasting of having drained away his brains as a stallion to some dark-eyed and warm Italian, Byron claims to have fornicated with some 200 women in a matter of months. He even offers a list of these seminal vessels: the Tarascelli, the Demosti, the Spinetta, the Lotti, the Risotto, the Eleonora, the Carlotta, the Giulietta, the Albizzi, the Zambieri, the Eleonora di Bezzi, who was the king of Naples, Giorgiono's mistress, at least one of them, the Teresina of Maserati, the Glettenheimer and her sister, the Luigia and her mother, the Forneretta, the Santa, the Caligari, the Portiera, the Bolognese Figuranti, the Tentor and her sister, cum multis aliis. Some of them are countesses, some of them are cobblers' wives, some noble, some middling, some low, and all whores. I have had them all, and thrice as many to boot, since 1817, he concludes boastfully. Clearly, not one to adhere to the adage that a gentleman never tells. Unfortunately, such excesses inevitably resulted in venereal disease, and here again, Byron doesn't really hold back in his letters. Eleanor Demosti, a gentle donna, was clapped, and she has clapped me. To be sure, it was gratis. The first gonorrhea I have not paid for. But I am getting better now, he assures his doubtless cringing correspondent. And now we'll briefly pause for a song by Offenbach on the topic of nighttime frolics. Although Byron could not have anticipated that John Murray would display his epistles on an easel for visitors to gawp at and titter over, he nevertheless knew that his publisher would be unable to resist showing them around. He therefore carefully constructs his letters for a wider audience, interspersing poetical matters with enticing details of vile assignations and adulterous beds. In this fashion, Byron not only burnishes his highly profitable reputation for sexual depravity, but also ensures that despite his exile, he remained an integral part of London's literate homosocial culture with his ribald accounts of what he calls fuff and passards and fair fucking. At the same time, Byron, writing letters as a foreigner far from my own country, provides valuable insights into the practices of those he wittily dubs the continental incontinent. His jocular stories of Amicizia, the adulterous liaison, and Chichisbeismo, the wife's selection of a formerly recognized lover, or cavalier servente, offer a unique insight into the specifics of what he mockingly terms the meridian morality, where polygamy is all on the female side. As Byron stresses to John Murray, Venetian women were not only extremely attractive, but also extremely sexually active. However, he also emphasizes that they only indulge in such practices once they are married. For here, no women will do anything under adultery, he remarks. Indeed, he explains, a relazione or amicizia seems to be a regular affair from 5 to 15 years, at which point, if there is a widowhood, it finishes by a spousalitio. In another letter, Byron observes that there is no convincing a woman here that she is in the smallest degree deviating from the rule of right or the fitness of things in having an amoroso. The great sin seems to lie in concealing it, or in having more than one, unless, that is, such an extension of the prerogative is understood of and approved by the prior claimant. In fact, he explains, a woman is virtuous, according to the code, who limits herself to her husband and one lover. Those who have 2 or 3 more are a little wild, but it is only those who are indiscriminately diffuse and form a low connection who are considered as overstepping the modesty of marriage. Letters such as these suggest that adultery was commonplace in Venice at the time, accepted and even expected. It is very well known that almost all married women have a lover, Byron writes. Nobody minds such trifles, except to be amused by them. This idea of adultery as a mere trifle, a social peccadillo rather than an illegal act, is suggestively conveyed by Byron's repeated use of a card game motif. In one letter, he describes matrimonial infidelity as a game at hearts. In another, he explains that December is the season when everybody makes up their intrigues for the ensuing year and cuts for partners for the next deal. Adultery in Venice seems to be an enjoyable game which everyone gets to play, regardless of gender and class. However, while spousal fidelity was of little consequence, loyalty to one's lover was of paramount importance. Byron was shocked at the awful notions of constancy demanded in Italy, where affairs could last for decades. I have seen some ancient figures of 80 pointed out as amorosi of 40, 50, and 60 years standing, he exclaims, appalled at the idea of an adulterous liaison with all the rigid and intractable permanence of marriage. Caught straying himself, Byron ruefully describes his discovery that male lovers are deemed perfidious if they look at anybody else's wife except their neighbours. Errant women likewise face censure, as he illustrates in a letter to Thomas More describing a row the other night about the lady of the place. She was exposed for infidelity, not to her husband, but to her cavalier servente. Great scandal, Byron writes with relish, planted by her lover, to be thrashed by her husband for inconstancy to her regular servente, and she herself retired in confusion into the country, all the women furious against her for being found out. And now I'll hand over to our singers for Roger Quilter's song on sensual beauty. While Byron claimed to have enjoyed adulterous liaisons with everyone, from the fisherman's wife up to the noble Donna, today I want to focus on his three official relationships, which were, as he puts it, formed according to the incontinent continental system. That with Mariana Sagatti, his Venetian landlord's wife, with Margherita Cogni, a country baker's wife, and finally with Teresa Guiccioli, the wife of a count from Ravenna. When Byron first arrived in Venice in November 1816, he took lodgings in Cala di Pessina, close to the magnificent Piazza San Marco. "I've got some extremely good apartments in the house of a merchant of Venice," he informs Thomas More, going on to explain that the merchant, Pietro Sagatti, is a good deal occupied with business and has a wife in her 22nd year. This is the first extant mention of Mariana Sagatti, whom Byron elsewhere describes as by far the prettiest woman I have seen here. He concludes his letter to Thomas More with the exciting information that I have fallen in love, which, next to falling in the canal, which would be of no use as I can swim, is the best or worst thing that I could do. A week later, and Byron is waxing even more lyrically to John Murray. Mariana is his goddess, and he is in love, fathomless love. "Our little arrangement is completed," he writes smugly. "The usual oaths have been taken. and everything fulfilled according to the understood relations of such liaisons. In a subsequent letter, he gleefully tells Mari that he manages to have sex with Mariana every day, under her husband's very nose, receiving from 1 to 3, and occasionally an extra or so, are unequivocal proofs of mutual good contentment. Mariana's husband appears to have been remarkably indifferent to what was occurring under his own roof, and I think this suggests that such practices were, if not expected, then certainly commonplace. Byron reinforces this impression in a letter to his best friend and fellow traveller John Cam Hobhouse, in which he explains, "You need not be alarmed. Jealousy is not the order of the day in Venice, and daggers are out of fashion, while duels, on love matters, are unknown, at least with the husbands." Yet, despite this display of urbanity, Byron was not quite so suave as he pretended. When his cuckolded landlord burst into the apartment one evening to find Mariana fainting upon a sofa, surrounded by all the apparatus of confusion, dishevelled hair, hats and handkerchiefs, and the lady as pale as ashes, the shamefaced poet refuses to admit they were having a violent lovers' quarrel. The cause of this quarrel, he ruefully confesses to Thomas More, was an illicit meeting with Mariana's sister-in-law, whom he describes as a well-looking blonde girl of about 19. She had snuck into Byron's apartments when Mariana was out, and they were just getting to know each other when, lo, in a very few minutes, in marches, to my very great astonishment, Mariana Sagatti, in propria persona, and, after making the most polite curtsy to her sister-in-law and to me, without a single word, seizes her said sister-in-law by the hair and bestows upon her some 16 slaps, which would have made your ear ache only to hear their echo. I need not describe the screaming which ensued. The luckless visitor took flight. Byron then describes how he seized Mariana, who fairly went into fits in my arms, and, in spite of reasoning, eau de cologne, vinegar, half a pint of water, and God knows what other waters beside, continued so till past midnight. At this point, her husband bursts in, and Byron is forced to dissemble. This farcical scene, worthy of the best restoration cuckolding comedies, draws attention to a crucial feature of the amicizia, which Byron was currently involved in, namely that while the affair might not be permanent, there was an expectation that it be confined to one object for the duration. Byron explains that Mariana had seen her sister-in-law's gondola nearby and, jealously protective of her amoroso, had stealthily returned to perpetrate this piece of pugilism. And now for another piece by Rossini, aptly depicting a cat fight. Yet Byron, despite swearing innocence, eternal constancy, etc., etc., was almost constitutionally incapable of fidelity and unable to resist a pretty woman. He gleefully writes to Murray of the fight which erupted when one of his other paramours came face to face with La Signora Sagatti. However, Margherita Cogni, a fiercer opponent than Mariana's easily vanquished sister-in-law, was uncowed. Byron was unsurprisingly rather flattered at the idea of two women fighting over him before an entranced crowd in the packed marketplace, and he can't resist sharing the details. Marguerite threw back her veil and replied in very explicit Venetian, "You are not his wife, and I am not his wife. You are his donna, and I am his donna. Your husband is a cuckold, and mine is another. For the rest, what right have you to reproach me? If he prefers what is mine to what is yours, is it my fault? If you wish to secure him, tie him to your petticoat string. Don't think to speak to me without reply just because you happen to be richer than I am." This incident highlights Mariana's perception of other women as a threat to her sexual property and her willingness to confront those who she viewed as trespassers upon her carnal preserve. And Margherita, interestingly, seems to share this conceptualization of the female rights of sexual conquest. "If you wish to secure him, tie him to your petticoat string," she shouts at her rival, casting Byron as a passive object in a purely female conflict. And I think the sarcastic tenor of this fight is wonderfully invoked in the next piece by Mozart. Byron first met Margherita in August 1817 in a little village just outside Venice, where Hobhouse and he had retreated to escape the fetid Venetian summer. In a letter to Murray, Byron recounts how "We were sauntering on horseback along the Brenta one evening when amongst a group of peasants we remarked two girls as the prettiest we had seen in for some time." Though Mariana, his mistress, was also staying nearby, Byron was unable to resist the charms of a very tall and formidable girl of 23, with the large black eyes and handsome face of a pretty fiend. He propositioned the young beauty, and Margarita apparently responded that she had no objection to making love with me as she was married, and all married women did it. The affair lasts a few weeks, and then Byron resumes his travels around Italy, leaving the baker's wife behind. He subsequently returned to Mariana and his lodgings in the Sagatti household, but by early 1818 he had tired of both his bourgeois mistress and his humble lodgings, and decided to move into a rather grander abode, taking apartments in the fabulous Palazzo Mocenigo overlooking the Grand Canal. Margarita soon followed because, Byron explains, whenever she came, I never allowed any other connection to interfere with her, and when she found herself out to be a favourite, she came to Venice pretty often. Eventually, Margarita moved into the Palazzo Mocenigo on a permanent basis, on the somewhat dubious grounds that her baker husband scandalously neglected his oven. I don't know why, but that always makes me laugh. And as Byron admits to his sister Augusta Lee, I am a little embarrassed by my unexpected acquisition. He describes how the chaste wife of a baker, having quarrelled with her tyrannical husband, was run away to me, God knows without being invited, and she resists all the tears and penitence and beg pardons of her disconsolate lord, and the threats of the police and the priest of the parish besides, and swears that she won't give up her unlawful love, myself, for anybody or anything. I assure you, I have begged her in all possible ways to go back to her husband, promising her all kinds of eternal fidelity into the bargain, but she only flies into a fury. Byron then notes that, instead of being scandalized, all the women commend her and say she has done the right thing. Returning again to Mozart, I think this piece vividly conveys the pleasures of a light-hearted flirtation with a beautiful brunette.
I choose that tall one. I've decided it is the one. When that is I'll take for his small heart. I would also like some fun. I'll reach his playful movie. I know it's just a game. He'll be sighing, he'll be sighing, I'll be doing just the same. He will say, I kneel before you. He will say, I adore you. We can dally at our leisure. We can dally at our leisure. Hours of pleasure, hours of fun. Hours of pleasure, hours of fun. I choose the prize I'll take on his soul. I'm the one he'll be soaring, he'll be soaring. All I know is just a game. I'll be doing just the same. He will say, I kneel before you. He will say, I adore you. We will dally we will dally at our leisure, hours of pleasure, hours of fun. We will dally at our leisure, hours of pleasure, hours of fun. Such hours of fun. We will dally at our leisure, hours of pleasure, hours of fun. Hours of pleasure. Hours of fun.
Margarita is the inspiration for some of Byron's funniest letters, from his laudatory description of her unspoilt figure, a great desideration in a hot climate where they grow relaxed and doughy and flumpety, to the accounts of her vain insistence on peacocking about in the hat and feathers of a fine noblewoman. Byron writes that, "I put the first in the fire, but got them long before she did, buying them." However, one of his most provocative tales concerns Margarita's extreme piety. "I forgot to mention that she was very devout," he tells John Murray archly, "and would cross herself if she heard prayer time strike, even during sex, when the ceremony did not appear to be much in unison with what she was then about." And this next piece that we're going to listen to is by Bach, and I think it's probably the single most beautiful piece of music ever written, and really embodies the sensuous spirituality which Byron discovers in his Italian lovers. Margarita was a fiercely passionate woman. Indeed, Byron recounts that her favourite terms of endearment were, "I would go for you in the midst of 100 knives," and "I wish you well, even to killing." And he clearly relished these displays of fierce passion by a woman he describes as wild as a witch and fierce as a demon. And he certainly found her animalistic intensity extremely arousing. One night, when he was caught in a storm out on the lagoon, Byron returned to find Margarita standing in the rain, awaiting his return, looking like Medea alighted from her chariot, with lightning flashing round her and waves rolling at her feet. Her joy at seeing me again was moderately mixed with ferocity, and gave me the idea of a tigress, he writes flippantly, though her welcome was disconcertingly tempered with insults. "Cana della Madonna," she screamed at him angrily. "Dog of the Virgin." Though undoubtedly alluring, however, such ferocity was also rather unnerving. Byron admits to Thomas More that he was more than half convinced that if I put a poignard in her hand, she would plunge it where I told her, and into me if I offended her. And our next piece from Mozart's Don Giovanni illustrates this spirited Mediterranean temperament. Finally, however, Margarita's histrionics palled, particularly as she became more jealous, beating Byron's other women and stealing his letters to try and decipher whether they were from women or not, because she couldn't read. Even his servants were apparently absolutely terrified of her. When he finally issued her congé, Margarita responded with a poor attitude, shall we say. Byron calls it her devilish spirit, as she threatened knives and revenge, smashed a window to break into the palazzo, and even threw herself into the canal, in a highly melodramatic suicide attempt, which was, as Byron points out, pretty pointless, really, in a city where not only did she and every other inhabitant swim extremely well, but the water was only knee-deep. And this next piece by Hansel is based on one of Byron's own poems, Farewell to Thee. Shortly after dispensing with Margarita's leonine charms, Byron embarks on the longest and most formalized of his Italian liaisons. He first met the newly married Countess Teresa Griccioli in January 1818. But it was not until April 1819, when they met again, that he fully appreciated her appeal. I have fallen in love with a Romagnola Countess from Ravenna, who is 19 years old and has a count of 50, he tells Hobhouse. In a surprisingly measured letter from a man in the first throes of new passion, he describes her as very pretty, but also a great coquette, extremely vain, excessively affected, clever enough, but without the smallest principle, and a good deal of imagination and some passion. Byron and Teresa enjoyed a heady fling of just 10 days, and Byron sends Hobhouse titillating details of how he consummated this unlawful union with all the proper rites in a covered gondola. However, the convent-educated Teresa was, as Byron wrote complainingly, innocent even to ignorance, and had no idea of how to conduct an adulterous dalliance with proper circumspection. She answers aloud when she should whisper, and calls out, "Mio Byron," at public gatherings, Byron grumbles. Her husband Alessandro was deeply embarrassed, and he whisked Teresa back to Ravenna, leaving a far from disconsolate Byron to resume relations with his old bedmates the very same day. And now we have another piece based on one of Byron's less well-known poems, The Bird of Love. Byron's dalliance with Teresa would probably have ended after the initial 10 days, if not for the fact that Alessandro was from the city of Ravenna. Here, as Byron subsequently discovered, they still practiced the good old Italian custom of cicisbeismo. The cicisbeo is the formally acknowledged Cavalier Servente, a lover who had the public and declared task of living side by side with another man's wife, often in the same house, as part of an arranged and desirable triangle. Byron perceptively ascribes this standardized promiscuity to arranged marriages between very young women and much older men. The reason is that they marry for their parents and love for themselves, he writes. They exact fidelity from a lover as a debt of honor, while they pay the husband as a mere tradesman. While not arduous, the duties of the Cavalier Servente were frequently tedious, whiling away the hours in acts of fawningly submissive devotion. Byron variously describes the lover as a vice husband, a supernumerary slave, a flatterer of fiddlers, and a fan carrier. And he explains the custom of cicisbeismo to Murray, noting that it has its rules and its fitnesses and decorums, so as to be reduced to a kind of discipline or game at arts, which admits few deviations unless you wish to lose it. The first rule is that married women always wait a year before taking a lover. The second is that a woman is typically only allowed one lover at a time. According to Byron, anyone who has more than the usual staff establishments of aide-de-camp is considered somewhat capricious. Equally, however, a wife without a lover is something of a novelty. Byron tells Hobhouse of a sposa fiorentina, a pretty girl yet in abeyance, but no one can yet decide who is to be her servente, because most of the men are already adultered, and she is showing no preferences to any who are not. This anecdote presents female infidelity as less a social nicety and more a social necessity. Thus, when urged to abandon her English lover, Teresa allegedly responds, "It is hard that I should be the only woman in Romagna who is not to have her amico." And now a piece from Bellini on the flames of thwarted passion. When Teresa became gravely ill and begged for Byron, her husband dutifully sends for him. Byron, no doubt flattered to be considered necessary to a lady's very life, sets off from Venice at once, riding, if not ventre a terre, then at least with appreciable haste. Within a few weeks, Byron is installed in the Guiccioli Palazzo as Teresa's openly acknowledged Cavalier Servente, with, to his profound surprise, Alessandro's grudging approval. Teresa then flaunts Byron in society as her cicisbeo. Byron, bemused, writes of how the G's object appeared to be to parade her foreign lover as much as possible, and, faith, if she seemed to glory in the scandal, it's not for me to be ashamed of it. Nobody seemed surprised at all. In fact, all the women on the contrary were, as it were, delighted with the excellent example. Used to the codes of conduct enjoined by the equally libidinous but rather more discreet English beau monde, Byron was initially disconcerted by the more brazen formalities of the Italian aristocracy. And this difference is particularly illustrated by Teresa's response to receiving a diamond brooch from Byron, who was startled when she returned it with her own hair in it. I shall not say which part, he writes salaciously, but that is an Italian custom. Byron was no stranger to this sort of thing, having received pubic hair from Lady Caroline Lamb, bloodstained from where she had cut too close to the skin. But to receive it proudly encased in a diamond brooch was certainly something new. Byron was also somewhat amused to learn that, as Teresa's lover, he was expected to escort her to cocktail parties and balls, where he would take care of her shawl and stand respectfully behind her chair until she chose to leave, at which point he was supposed to lovingly dispose the shawl about her shoulders. He writes to one friend, I am drilling very hard to learn how to double a shawl, and should succeed to admiration, if I did not always double it the wrong side out. And then I sometimes confuse and bring away too, so as to put all the serventi out, besides keeping their servite in the cold. And now we'll pause briefly to listen to Handel's piece on demanding lovers. Though undoubtedly still attached to Teresa, as the months passed, Byron's letters display a growing dissatisfaction with what he miserably terms his cavalier servitude, and the quasi-matrimonial monogamy which she and the Italian women demanded. They are extremely tenacious and jealous as furies, not permitting their lovers even to marry if they can help it, and keeping them always close, in public as in private, wherever they can. In short, he writes, outraged, they transfer marriage to adultery and strike the knot out of that commandment. He writes a lengthy complaint to Hobhouse, in which he disconsolately admits that, while not tired of Italy, he is wearied by his position. Here a man must be a cicisbeo, and a singer in duets, and a connoisseur of operas, or nothing. I have made some progress in all these accomplishments, but I can't say I don't feel the degradation. I like women, he continues, unnecessarily, Hobhouse being well aware of his amorous propensities. But the more their system here develops upon me, the worse it seems. And I think it's often unclear what Byron resents more, the fact that here polygamy is all on the female side, or the fact that here they expect adultery to be for life. Despite initially claiming to be in love and tired of promiscuous concubinage, and ready to consider settling for life, in what he mockingly terms the very strictest adultery, monogamy was not to Byron's taste. After just 2 months in Ravenna, he dispatches a letter to Hobhouse describing 2 young women he had his eye on, both friends of Teresa. Gertrude Vicar, a very pretty woman, and Ursula something or other, one of the prettiest creatures I ever saw. In a separate account to Augusta, Byron recounts how Teresa detected me in an illicit squeezing of hands, the consequences of which is that the friend was whisked off, and Byron soundly scolded. Of course, Byron being Byron, even when in the grip of indignation, he cannot resist the humour of his situation, sending stories about how Teresa's suspicion extend even to the appallingly ugly mistress of his devoted manservant Fletcher. However, the ludicrousness of this situation in no way mitigated his dissatisfaction at the subordinate role he now inhabited, reduced to a mere piece of female property. And I'll pause here for Henry Bishop's work on jealousy and fidelity. Underneath the rakish machismo, Byron's frame of cultural reference remains irrevocably English. Though undoubtedly relishing the comedic nature of his inherently ambiguous position, and despite his eager adoption of Italian customs and the sexual perks they facilitated, Byron viewed the cicisbeo tradition as undignified and emasculating. I feel it and feel it bitterly, he writes. that a man should not consume his life at the side and on the bosom of a woman. Even the recompense, and it is much, is not enough, and that this Chisbean existence is to be condemned. But, he concludes with weary resignation, I have neither the strength of mind to break my chain, nor the insensibility to deaden its weight. And so the affair continued until 1823, when he finally left Teresa and embarked upon his ill-fated trip to Greece. In truth, it is a terrible shame, I think, that Byron didn't create the volume of manners on Italy and the Amicizia, which John Murray had requested. It would undoubtedly have been a riotous and illuminating read. However, at least we have his lively letters, delightfully frank on the topic of honest liaisons and fair fucking, and full of unique insights into the differences between strictest adultery and mere fuff-fuff.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. But most thanks go to Gavin, to Helen, and to Millie, and also, of course, to she who is in Dubai, Emily Patterson-Morgan. That's been a wonderful telling of just 2 years' worth, just over 2 years of Byron's life. I'm sure there'll be more next year if you want to pick up where that left off. I do need to point out, though, and this is very serious, that some of the views and opinions expressed are not those of the rector and church wardens of St. Marylebone Parish Church. And I also don't suggest you try out many of the things mentioned at home when you get there. This evening, we leave the steamy waters of Venice behind, and we head to the damp but ever so chaste shores of Wales, where we will have a concert, which is a change to our programme, of music by composers who have travelled from Wales to the Royal Academy of Music. And it promises to be a really wonderful evening with Eleanor Rolfe Johnson and, again, Gavin accompanying her. A date for your diaries, and that is the 12th of September this year, which is a Sunday, and it is exactly 175 years to the day that Rob Browning married Elizabeth Barrett here in the parish church. And on that day, we will have a day of festivities in the morning. During our choral Eucharist, there will be a presentation by 6 of our actors and presenters who are members of our congregation here at St. Marylebone. And in the afternoon, there will be a lecture by Fiona Sampson, MBE, who is the biographer, the latest biography of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So a day filled with very good things. So I hope that you will come along and join us for that as we celebrate 2 other poets who are intimately connected with this place. The 12th of September, yes, and it is 175 years to the day. So if you forget the date, just look at Robert and Elizabeth or the rector of St. Marylebone's birthday, and you will come across the date, 12th of September, 1846. That wasn't my birthday, that was a little later on. But now, would you please show your appreciation once again for Gavin, for Millie, and for Helen.